Hello and welcome to my office. Those of you who've never been here, University Hall 3633. We're talking today about the resolution to Kant's third antinomy, which, as you know from the previous class, is the way that reason comes into conflict with itself over the question of whether freedom and natural necessity can coexist with one another. And in terms that we can understand a little better today, this is the question of whether the modern scientific worldview, in which everything that happens, every event that happens in our experience must have a cause, whether that modern scientific worldview, in fact, rules out the possibility that the will is free. And of course, what's at stake there essentially is morality. Morality commands us to do certain actions, and it doesn't make any sense for morality to command us to do actions that we're not capable of. If we're not capable of choosing, then all we can do is, through physics and psychology and chemistry and so forth, analyze what it is that happens when a human being appears to choose something, but in fact we're never choosing anything. Okay, so Kant's resolution of the third antinomy begins on page 532. And I want to look first at page 534 at Kant's articulation of the difficulty and of a possible way of talking about the solution. So I'm on page 534 towards the bottom of the page here. So you'll need to open your own text in order to look at this with me. So starting after the semicolon, so I'm directly below A 536B 564, semicolon. Thus, the difficulty we encounter in the question about nature and freedom is only whether freedom is possible anywhere at all, and if it is, whether it can exist together with the universality of the natural law of causality. Okay, so that only in the sentence tells us that the question that Kant's dealing with is somewhat restricted. The question about nature and freedom is only whether freedom is possible anywhere at all. In other words, Kant is not trying to establish here whether freedom is necessarily the case. He's only trying to establish whether the modern scientific worldview rules out the possibility of freedom. So Kant is simply trying to rule in the possibility of freedom, but that turns out to be a big deal. Okay, so he then says, so skipping a phrase beyond the one that I read, comma, or whether instead both, each in a different relation, might be able to take place simultaneously in one and the same occurrence. So here Kant is opening up the possibility that he suggested much earlier in the critique, that we might be able to solve our problem by, in fact, looking at events in the world through two different perspectives. One from the perspective of things as they are in themselves, and second, as from the perspective of things as they appear to us. So the suggestion here is that somehow that distinction is going to help us with the third antinomy, with the nature-freedom conflict. Now I want you to think all the way back to the preface and introduction of the Critique of Pure Reason, and to Kant's articulation of the Copernican revolution in philosophy. And remember that the Copernican revolution in philosophy is an experiment that we're running. And the experiment is going to be a success. In other words, the Copernican revolution in philosophy is going to be proven if we can resolve these contradictions of reason with itself, the ways that reason gets stuck. If a shift in perspective can show us how those conflicts can be diffused, then we we'll know that the Copernican revolution in philosophy is true, that it's an advance of the kind that the Copernican revolution in astronomy was. Now, a further note that I want to make on this passage is that Kant has again suggested much earlier, at the beginning of talking about the antinomies. We didn't read this part, but I described it to you in class, where Kant wants to suggest that those who maintain the thesis, who were largely the rationalist philosophers before him, and those who maintain the antithesis, who were largely the empiricists who came before them, that both of them have made a common mistake. And of course, the common mistake would be that both of them have taken things as they appear to us and things as they are in themselves as the same. And that by separating them, in fact, we can diffuse the controversy. Okay, we'll move on in the next video to another passage.